Zat Hashem, we're holding a Masechet Megilla and Davav Mud Aleph 6a, and we're going to start Amar Rava, which is sixth line on the page. Amar Rava. Everybody see Amar Rava? The sixth line on the page. Amar Rava.
Yeah.
Amar Rava. Okay, so just to remember, we're going to have actually two sections today. The first section we're going to deal with is clarifying what is this city called Reket. So yesterday Rabbi Yochanan told us what is Reket. We'll see it's not so simple that it'll be challenged today. We're going to then continue on discussing a certain city, Kitron. We'll get to that as well. And then the second half, really, we'll get to a series of Agadata Gemaras about different cities, different Agadatas about Rome. Very interesting stuff happens to be about the unique relationship between Yisrael and Edom. There is a uniqueness. Edom is like the representative of the Goyim in general. It's Esav. And Yisrael is Yaakov, is the Jewish people. It's a very interesting contrast. We'll get to that as well later today. So just to remember, yesterday we left off, Rabbi Yochanan had told us that he said, when I was young, I said a point, an idea, and I asked an old person, and he confirmed that it was true. Now, what was it? He said, the pasuk when we mentioned yesterday that discusses the cities in Naphtali, in Nachalat Naphtali. So we said one of those cities was, we said Reket and Hamat, Reket, Kinneret. These were different cities in Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Yochanan identified these cities, and we're going to challenge his identification. That's what we're going to start off with today. So how did he identify them? He said the city that they call Hamat is actually Tiberia. Okay, Hamat in the Torah is Tiberia. Okay, it's called Hamat because of Chamei Tiberia, the hot springs of Tiberia. Reket is Tzipori, and he goes on to explain that. And Kinneret is Ginosar. Now, Rava doesn't appreciate this pshat. As we're about to see, he disagrees. So Amar Rava. Rava says as follows: Mi ikalamanda Amar. Is there anyone who holds Reket lav Tiberia that Reket is not Tiberia? It's everyone agrees that Reket is Tiberia. So you're wrong because you're saying Hamat is Tiberia, but actually the other city that's mentioned in that pasuk, which is Reket, Reket is what we call modern day Tiberia, or in times of the Gemara as well. How do we know that? Because I'll tell you a few stories that prove that. Rava said like this: when a person used to pass away in Bavel, so a Jew who would pass away in Bavel, see, Hatam there, meaning there means in Tiberia. So the Jew's body would be brought to Tiberia to be buried because they would bury the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. And Tiberia was, I guess, the place they would bring them. So when a Jew would die in Bavel, Hatam there in Tiberia, Safti lehachi, they would eulogize the person as follows. They would say, Gadol hu b'shashach, he was great in Bavel, V'shem lo bereket, and he had a name in Reket, meaning referring to Tiberia. So you see, Reket is clearly Tiberia, that's the point. And when the coffin would arrive in Tiberia, Safti lehachi, they would say the following eulogy. The one who loved Jews, Yoshvei Reket Tze'u v'kablu arugei Omek. The ones who live in Reket, meaning in Tiberia, should go and accept those who had been killed in Omek. Omek is in the depths, because Bavel was much lower than Eretz Yisrael. It's known as that. We saw that in Ta'anit, actually. The point is, you see from this story that Reket is Tiberia. And a similar story, Kinach Nafshe de Rabbi Zera, when Rabbi Zera passed away. Now he passed away, it seems to be in Eretz Yisrael, but we'll see. So a certain eulogizer began saying the following: Eretz Shinar Haravi Alda, the land of Shinar. Shinar is Bavel. Shinar is Bavel. So the land of Bavel Haravi Alda. The land of Bavel, we're holding Vav Amud Aleph 6a, just at the wide lines, just about the wide lines. The land of Bavel Haravi Alda. The land of Bavel was impregnated and gave birth to Rabbi Zera. That means that he was born there and he was raised in Bavel, Rabbi Zera. Eretz Tzvi, but the land of Tzvi, which literally is a deer, but it refers to Eretz Yisrael throughout the Torah, Gidla Sha'ashueha. It raised, made great Sha'ashueh. It's Sha'ashueh literally means its plaything or its desirable thing, referring to Rabbi Zera, because Rabbi Zera had moved to Eretz Yisrael. Oy nala amra Reket, woe now, says Reket, meaning Tiberia, ki avda klechem data, because it has lost its desirable vessel, referring to Rabbi Zera. But the point that Rav is making is that you see clearly Reket is actually the city of Tiberia. Okay, fine. So Ella amar Rava, so rather Rava says a different pshat. He says as follows, now he goes through those cities again. Chamat, when the pasuk says Chamat, Zu Chame Gerar, it refers to a city of Gerar, which also has hot springs. So it's Gerar, different city. Reket Zu Tiveria, the first white line on the page. Reket refers to Tiveria. Okay, like we said. Kinneret Zu Ginosar. Now, Kinneret is Ginosar. We said that's the place where there's delicious fruit. Remember, we said that yesterday. Velama Nikroshma Reket. Now, why is Tiveria called Reket? It's a beautiful idea. She'afilu rekanin sheba, even the empty Jews in Reket, in Tiveria, mele'in mitzvot kerimon. They're full of mitzvot like a pomegranate. Reket means empty, like rekanin. So even the Jews who are not necessarily the most learned people, they still are full of mitzvot like a pomegranate, like the seeds. Rabbi Yirmiyah continues on this theme and he says, Reket Shema, actually, the city is called Reket, and Tiveria is the descriptor. Velama nikra Shema Tiveria, so why is it described as Tiveria? Sheyoshevet betibura shel Eretz Yisrael, because this city of Reket sits in Tibura. Tibura is the belly button, literally the middle. It sits in the middle of Eretz Yisrael. So Tibura in the middle of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbah says the third explanation, Reket Shema, it's actually called Reket. Why is it called Tiveria? Because it is a beautiful thing to see. Tosafot says here, the city of Reket had many gardens and orchards. It was a beautiful, lush area. Okay, let's continue. Moving on now. Amar Ze'ira. Ze'ira says the following, Kitron. There is a city described in Nach as Kitron, which is in the portion of Zevulun. Okay? And Kitron, Zu Tzipori. This is the city of Tzipori. Okay, so Kitron is actually the city we know as Tzipori. V'lama nekra shma Tzipori. Why is it called Tzipori? Tzipori is a lashon of a tzipor, which is a bird. Sheyoshevet b'rosh hahar ketzipor, because it sits on the top of a mountain like a bird. Like a bird has its nest on the top of a mountain. So this city of Kitron also sits on top of a mountain. Now the Gemara is about to challenge this based on a very interesting drush that we're about to see in the Psukim. Asks the Gemara, the Kitron Tzipori, is Kitron really Tzipori? Like Rabbi Ze'ira said, like Ze'ira saying, the Kitron Tzipori hi v'ha-Kitron b'chelko shel Zvulun Havai. And we're going to have a long proof to argue against this. Again, Ze'ira is saying the city identified as Kitron is actually called Tzipori today. The Gemara says that's impossible. Why is that impossible? Because we know Kitron is in the portion of Zevulun. Shal Zvulun Havai. Tichtiv, like we know in Shoftim, the pasuk says, Zevulun lo harish et yoshvei Kitron ve'et yoshvei Nahalol. Zevulun did not conquer and kick out the inhabitants of Kitron and Nahalol. It's a very interesting thing. When the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael under Yeshua's leadership, they conquered the land and it was apportioned and split up to the different tribes. Now, each of the tribes was given the areas and was told, you have to conquer these areas, and ideally, you should remove the Goyim from those areas who are worshiping idols. If you leave the Goyim in those areas who are worshiping idols, it'll become a problem for you later, because what's going to happen is, you will be seduced by them, and then start to worship idols like them, and eventually you'll get kicked out of the land, which is actually what ended up happening. So the pasuk says regarding Zevulun that they did not kick out the inhabitants of Kitron, so they conquered the area, but they didn't kick these people out, and it ended up being a problem for them. The point is, we see clearly Kitron was in the dominion, it was an area under the domain of Zevulun. Fine.
Not only the people, but the Avodah
itself, of course. That's right, of course. But the Gemara says, so we know, so we just proved that Kitron was in the portion of Zevulun. Vizvulun mitra'im al midotav hava, and we know Zevulun complained about its inheritance. Zevulun didn't like its portion. How do we know that? Shneimar, the pasuk tells us in the Shira of Devorah in Shoftim, it says Zevulun am cheref nafsho lamut. It says Zevulun was a nation that cursed its soul to die, meaning it was upset about its portion. Matam, what's the reason? Because the end of the verse says there in Shoftim, Mishum de Naftali al maromei sadeh, because it says Naftali had the elevated fields, meaning Zevulun was upset because it didn't get portions like its brethren in Eretz Yisrael, like Naftali, for example. Amar Zevulun lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is all, it's a midrash, but the point is, we're going to prove from this that Kitron can't be Tzipori. That's what we're going to get back to. Amar Zvulun lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Zvulun said in front of Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the world, La'achai, to my brothers, Natata lehem sadot ukramim, you gave them fields and vineyards. But you gave me mountains and hills. Mountains and hills aren't as good for planting. So you gave me something that's less, Jews complaining is not a new thing. It's not as lush. It's not as, what? Always, right? Lachai, to my brothers, natata lemaratzot, you gave them lands, flat lands. Velina tata yamim v'narot, and you gave me oceans and rivers, seas and rivers. Amar lo, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu turned back to him and he said in the drasha, the pasuk, it says, Kulam tzrichin lecha yedei chilazon. Oh, the rest of the Jewish people are going to be reliant on you. They're going to need you for the chilazon. We know the chilazon was a special creature that had an extract that was called blue. It was blue that they would dye wool with, and it was techelet anar tzitzit. So that's going to come from your portion. So everyone's going to need you. That's your chashivut. How do we know that? Shneimar, as it says in Zot HaBracha, when Moshe blesses the Jewish people, he talks about Zvulun. It's Amim Har Yikra'u. Nations will call to the mountain. Visfunei, and that which is buried, Temunei Chol, hidden in the sand. So each of these words refers to something unique about the portion of Zevulun. Tani Rav Yosef explained, Sifunei, that part of the pasuk, Sifunei, Zechilazon, something that is hidden. It refers to the fact that the Chilazon, these little creatures, would come from the portion of Zevulun. Timunei, Zutrit. Timunei refers to trit. Rashi says it's a fish that's called tunina. So I think it's tuna. Tuna fish. It's going to come from your land. Very interesting. And chol zuz chuchit levana. Chol refers to white sand, white glass, meaning that the sand that came from the portion of Zevulun was used for making crystal. So it was a very expensive type producing glass. Mar lefanav ribono shel olam. So Zevulun turned to Hashem and he said, Mi modieni. Who's going to inform me about this? The Rashi explains is, who's going to recognize that this belongs to me and then pay me in order to take those things from me? It means maybe they'll just take these natural things in my territory and they won't actually pay me for it. So how do I know that I'll actually end up benefiting? So Marlo, so Hashem says back, as really within the brachot of Moshe, Sham yizbechu zivchei tzedek, there they will sacrifice righteous sacrifices. Meaning, as Rashi explains, just like it's prohibited to bring a korban that is stolen, also no, anyone who takes these products from your territory and tries to do business with them without paying you, they won't be successful. So it's going to be a natural resource to your territory. He explains as they try to dye using that techelet, the dye won't catch properly and it won't. It's haftacha Kadosh Baruch Hu gave. This is a sign for you. Anybody who takes your resources without paying won't be successful in their business. Beautiful. That's the end of this. But what's the point? Says the Gemara, you're telling me Ze'ira, Kitron is the land that we know which is called Tzipori. Okay, Kitron is Tzipori. But if it enters your mind, Kitron zot Tzipori, that Kitron is really Tzipori. Now we just proven that Kitron is in the portion of Zvulun. Why would Zvulun have been complaining about his portion? Tzipori was a wonderful area. We know, I guess the Gemara is saying, we know today, Tzipori is a lush and wonderful area. So why would they be complaining if they have this great area called Tzipori? So maybe you'll say that it didn't have the haftacha or the special uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael, that it was flowing in milk and honey. Now, there is a special character trait of Eretz Yisrael. It's called Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Dvash, a land flowing in milk and honey. I always understood it means it's extra fertile, it produces beautifully. Rashi learns kipshuto, flowing in milk and honey. So how does Rashi explain this? That the goats in Israel would eat from the figs, and then the honey and the milk from the honey from the figs and the milk from the goats would flow together, creating rivers of milk and honey. So it was a miraculous phenomena, essentially, that showed the fertile nature of Eretz Yisrael. So maybe the reason Zvulun was upset is because, they had nice territory of Tzipori, but it didn't have that same bracha of Zavat Chalav U'Dvash. Maybe that's why. Problem is, that's not true. We know that it did, because V'hamar Reish Lakish said, I saw the flowing of milk and honey of Tzipori. We're going to do very basic math in a minute, and it was 16 mil by 16 mil. So it was quite a significant amount of area that had this bracha in Tzipori. So that shouldn't be something they were upset about. Maybe you'll say, yeah, they had such a bracha, but they didn't have the same amount as the other tribes. Maybe that's why they were upset. The problem is, I saw this phenomena of the flowing of milk and honey of the entire Eretz Yisrael, meaning I put it all together, and it was like one of these cities to the other. Esrin v'tartin parsi orka, 22 parsa in length, upusya shisa parsi, and the width was 6 parsa. Now let's just do some basic math for a minute. 22 by 6, 4 mil is 1 parsa. So we said that for Tzipori was 16 mil by 16 mil, which means it was 4 parsa by 4 parsa. 4 times 4 is 16, which means it was 16 mil in what's that called? In 16 mil in square, 16 square. What do you call that? 16 mil. 16 mil. Let's just say 16 mil. Let's just keep it fair. Now 22 times 6 is 132. 22 times 6 is 132, which means the entire Eretz Yisrael, Zavat Chalav Udavash, was 132 mil. Let's just say it like that. Zevulun had 16. 132 divided by 16 is 8.25, which means their Zavat Chalav Udavash was 8.25 of the entire populace of Eretz Yisrael, which means if there's 12 tribes, they had actually more proportionally than the other tribes. So that shouldn't be an issue that they're upset about then, says the Gemara. So the Gemara says it would appear then that Ze'ira is wrong, and actually, not as we've been saying that Kitron is Tzipori, but it must be it's a different city. Rabbi David, would you do me a big favor and close the door when you go out, just because the noise is distracting? Thank you. So the Gemara says, no, nonetheless, still, really Kitron is Tzipori, but there's a different reason they were complaining. Why? Nonetheless, the fields and vineyards was still more preferable to them. Like the pasuk says, meaning like this. Really, their land was lush and wonderful, but they had hills and mountains, they had oceans, and they wanted fields and vineyards. That's what they were upset about, and they were complaining. But Ze'ira is upheld. Kitron could be Tzipori. Let's continue. Now, because we introduced these cities, the Gemara goes through a series of Agadita, and we're going to specifically get into cities of Edom. It's a very interesting Gemara. We know Esav and Yaakov were the forebearers, the ancestors of two great nations, the Jewish people, and what we know as Edom. Edom is associated with Rome. That's what it is associated with. So the pasuk tells us, Amar Rabbi Yavo. The pasuk says in Tzefania, Ve'ekron te'aker. It says te'aker. It says Ekron will be uprooted. So what is Ekron? So the Gemara says, Zo Kisari bat Edom. This is Kisaria from the country or the ownership, the domain of Edom. Now the Mefarshim actually speak out, as we'll see. This was an area that was originally a Plishti area, the Philistines. It was eventually conquered by the Greeks. And then after eventually it was conquered by the Greeks in the days of Chashmonim, we're about to see they overthrew the Greeks. It was relegated to territory owned by Edom, by Rome. That's what we're going to see. That's why it calls it Bat Edom, but actually there's a history in this territory. Sheyoshevet ben acholot, that it sits between the sands. V'ayta yetet kuali Yisrael b'yemei Yevanim, and it was a peg in the side of the Jews in the days of the Yevanim, meaning it caused problems for the Jews in the days of the Greeks. Ukeshagavra malchut beit Chashmonai b'natzchum, and when the Chashmonaim became powerful and overthrew them, hayukorin otah chidat migdal Shir, they started to call it the conquest or the conquering of the Tower of Shir. Some have Tzur, which was the capital of Edom. But the point is, that's what it's talking about in the pasuk, is it will be uprooted, this territory that eventually was relegated to being owned by Edom. Amar Rav Yossi bar Chanina, Mai dechtiv, what does it mean in Zechariah when the pasuk says as follows? Va'asiroti damav mipiv, I will remove blood from his mouth, v'shikutza mi bein shinav, and the disgusting things from between his teeth. V'nishar gam hu le'elokeinu, and it will remain for our God. V'asiroti dama mipiv, I will remove blood from his mouth. Zebeit bamya shelahen, this refers to the houses of Bamya. I'll explain this in a minute. V'shikutzami bein shinav, the disgusting things from between his teeth. Zebeit galia shelahen, this refers to the Beit Galia shelahen. Rashi learns Bamya and Galia are the Roshei Avodah Zarah for Edom. There are places of idol worship for Edom. So in the future, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, I'm going to remove those Avodah Zarah and destroy them. That's what's going to happen. The Pasuk continues and says,
Where are they now?
Of Edom.
Well, so
Rome would have been Rome. Exactly. Yeah, I guess modern day Rome reflects what was Rome, right? I guess, yeah. V'nishar gam hu le'Elokeinu, and it will remain for our God. Elu batei knesiot u'batei midrashot shebe'Edom. A beautiful idea is that the shuls and the batei midrashot of Edom, they will remain. Part of the reference here is there is such a concept that in the times of Mashiach, the shuls are going to fly to Eretz Yisrael. There is such a yesod that exists that the Gemara actually talks about later, towards the end of the Masechta. We'll get to that later. Pasuk says over there in Zechariah, it says, "V'haya ka'aluf b'Yehuda." He will be like a prince in Yehuda. The Ekron ki Yevusi, and Ekron will be like Yevusi. Yevusi is actually in Yerushalayim. So what is this referring to? Elo tratariot v'karkasiot shebe'Edom. This refers to the amphitheaters and circuses, or as other Mefarshim say, the Super Bowl. This refers to the places that they used to go for entertainment. Tosafot says maybe it refers to places of Avodah Zarah, or it refers to, he said he doesn't like that pshat, he says really it refers to places the Goyim used to gather. But other Mefarshim translate it as the circuses, amphitheaters, the gladiators. What are those places called? The places they used to have. That sort of Shebe Edom of Edom. She'atidin sarei Yehuda lelamed bahen Torah b'rabim. In the future, the officers of Yehuda, means the rabbis, are going to teach Torah in those places publicly. Meaning those places will be purified and will become places of being marbitz Torah. That's why Tosafot says it can't be that those, if it really refers to Avodah Zarah, there's no way. Meaning, it's too tameh to say that we're going to teach Torah, so Tosafot says that can't be. So those places are just going to be destroyed. This refers to the circuses. It's not as bad, at least. That's the point he says. All right, let's continue. Amr Rabbi Yitzchak, Leshem. Now there's a city in Nach, it's called Leshem, that was conquered by the tribe of Dan in Eretz Yisrael. So Zu Pamias, it refers to Pamias. Ekron to Aker, what is the city of Ekron that will be uprooted? Zu Kisri Bat Edom, which is the city of Kisri Bat Edom we described already. This was a large city or a metropolis of the kings of Edom. Now there's two versions what they used to do there. Ikada Amri, some say, Marbi Bamalki. They used to raise the future kings in those cities. That was where they would raise them, of Rome. Ikada Amri Demukmi Mina Malki, and some say that they would choose from them the kings from those areas. Now, regarding the contrast between Edom and the Jewish people, very interesting contrast. Kisri v'Yerushalayim. So Kisri, again, as representative of the nation of Edom, that city, and Yerushalayim as representing the Jewish people. In Yomer Lecha Adam Charvu Shtein, if people tell you both have been destroyed, Al Ta'amin, don't believe them. Yashvu Shtein, if people say both of them are settled or flourishing, Al Ta'amin, don't believe them. But if people say Charva Kisri v'Yashva Yerushalayim, that Kisri has been destroyed, Yerushalayim is flourishing, Charva Yerushalayim v'Yashva Kisri, or the opposite, Ta'amin, you could believe it. Meaning there's always an imbalance between these. Shene'em, like a pasuk says in Yecheskel, Amalei Achareva, I will fill it from destruction. Meaning the destruction of one will result in the production of the other. Imalei azu charvazu, Imalei azu charvazu. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says actually it's a pasuk that we find by Rivka in Parashat Toldot. It says Ula'om Yela'om Ya'ematz. A nation from a nation will take strength. That's what Rivka was told when she went to figure out what's the story with the two children. One nation will be empowered from the destruction of the other. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Ma'edichtiv. The pasuk tells us in Yeshaya, Yuchan Rasha Ba Lama Tzedek. It says in the pasuk, be gracious to the wicked, for he cannot learn righteousness. What is this referring to? Amar Yitzchak l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what happened is that Yitzchak Avinu went in front of Hashem, and he was pleading that Hashem be good to Esav. Esav. What did he say? Amar Yitzchak l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel Olam, Master of the world, Yuchan Esav, be gracious to Esav, be good to him. Amar lo, Hashem said, Rashawi is a wicked person. Amar lo, so Yitzchak said, Bala Matzedek, can he not learn righteousness? Amar lo, so Hashem said back, but it's a pasuk quoted in Yeshaya, the Eretz Nechuchot Yavel, the upright land, he will act perverted, which Rashi explains means he's going to destroy Eretz Yisrael. Edom is going to destroy Eretz Yisrael. It's the Chorah we're talking about in the times of Bayit Sheni. Amar lo, so Yitzchak said, Im Kain, Bal Yireh Geyut Hashem, if so, he shouldn't see the greatness of Hashem, means don't do good to him, destroy him, yeah. What does it mean in the pasuk in Tehillim when it says Al titen Hashem avaye rasha? Hashem, don't give the desire of the wicked. Zimamo al tefak, don't remove his zamam. I'll explain that in a moment. Yarumu sela, to allow him to be elevated. Sela. Rashi explains zimamo is a ring that they put in the nose of a large animal to control it. They used to put in the nose, you see sometimes those like cows with like a nose ring, and they would pull it. Sometimes when I see the nose rings, it's in fashion today, I think about this. But they used to pull the animal by it because it was so sensitive, and it could control a much larger creature by keeping that nose ring in the animal. That's the idea. So you're saying, don't remove the nose ring of Esav. What does that mean? So Amar Yaakov, Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yaakov was saying to Hashem, Ribono shel Olam, Master of the world, Al titen le'esav arasha ta'avat libo. Don't give Esav the desires of his heart, which is to bother, destroy Yaakov, to destroy his enemies, the Jewish people. Al tafek, don't remove his nose ring. What is that referring to? Turning the page to Vav Amud Bet. Zu Girmamya shel Edom. This refers to the city called Girmamya of Edom. Some of the Mefarshim learn this refers to Germany. She'ilmale hen yotzin, because if they would go out, there's such a destructive power that they wield. If they would go out into the world, if they would go out, machrivin kol ha'olam kulo, they would destroy the entire world. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, he keeps the nose ring in their nose. Means he keeps them controlled, because otherwise they would go out with their destructive force and wreak havoc on the entire world. Some say this is a reference to 80 years ago, 90 years ago, what occurred. Some say. And the Gemara illustrates a similar idea. V'amar Rabbi Chama bar Chanina, turning to Vav Amud Bet. V'amar Rabbi Chama bar Chanina, Tlat mea ketirei taga ika beGermamia. There's 300 crown princes in Germamia shel Edom. V'tlat mea v'shitin v'chamisha merzavni ika beRomi. And there's 365 chieftains, like princes also, in Rome. What's that?
No, principalities.
Merzavni? No, I think Merzavni is chieftains. Yeah, like the princes. Ika beRomi are in Rome. Ubechol yom, and every day, nafki hani la'ape hani, these go out to fight these, means they get in battles with each other. Umaktil chad minayu, and one of them is killed. Umitridi l'ukme malka, and they're busy trying to reestablish a new person in that position. But what's the Gemara illustrating? They're so busy interfighting with each other that they don't have the time or the ability to go fight with the world. So in doing so, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, he controls the destruction from spreading, because they fight within each other, and in doing so, he protects the rest of the world. That's the idea. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue on with Rabbi Yitzchak's drasha tomorrow on Vav Amud Bet. Have a wonderful day. Yeah.